Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Yinning at Life podcast. I'm your host, Kimberley Roberts of SolefulYin, and I come on here every Thursday and I dish out some super cool content, riffing on all things Meridian Yin Yoga, Chinese medicine, reflexology, organ health, emotional well-being, mindset. Yeah, that's all my jam. And so today, what I want to talk to you about is the power of a single pose and what that actually means. Okay. And I'm actually going to bring you into a personal story of mine because, when you have a personal story, it kind of just lands a little bit deeper, right? So welcome to this episode. I can't believe that I'm still doing this. This is awesome. I love recording this podcast. Okay, so a single yin pose. Now, first, let me talk about what is yin, especially if you're new to my podcast and maybe this is the first episode that you're listening to and you're like, I don't even know what she's talking about, especially Meridian Yin Yoga, right? Like you might know Yin Yoga, but then Meridian, it's like, whoa, that kind of perks your sparks, right? So how I define Meridian Yoga is this. So Yin Yoga is is a passive practice where we're holding poses for, minutes at a time. It's like 2, 3, up to 5, sometimes even 7 minutes, depending on the pose. And you're propped up. So I'm a real advocate of propping your body in a pose because when your body is properly supported, it'll let go, right? And even if you're super flexible, like I am, like I'm uber flexible, right? I still prop myself up because of the other benefits aside from the physical stretch. So a lot of people come to Yin Yoga because of the physical stretch. That's what, brings them to there. Maybe for some people it's, there's a little bit of a meditation component to it because they've been told that it's a passive practice. It's slow, it's mindful, you're breathing deep, you're not moving, right? Like you're only moving from one pose to the other, but it's not like you're standing up and dynamically moving, right? It's a really quiet, introspective practice. And for some people, that is great because if you're in the Western culture and you sit all day long and you use your body in ways that really our body is not intended to be used, the long, prolonged sitting, right? The hunched over. So we do get a lot of physical tension, right? And so there is that beautiful benefit of the stretch. I'm not going to negate that. I never do. But for me, the practice is really more from the ancient traditional Chinese medicine meridian theory approach. That's why I call it Meridian Yin Yoga, because I teach it from the meridian perspective. And now, if you don't know what meridians are, so I want you to imagine that there's garden hoses flowing throughout your body, everywhere, okay? Some of the garden hoses start in your fingers, some of them start in your feet, okay? And these garden hoses run up through the connective tissue and the fascial layers in your body, okay? And those fascial layers, those connective tissue areas are stimulated in a yin pose. The connective tissue is kind of like, I want you to think of it like the glue that holds everything together in your body, okay? And so it's very rigid and it's very tight, but it can be pliable and it can be flexible. And that's where the long hold stretch in yin helps with that because it creates that flexibility. But at the same time, it's also stimulating a specific meridian channel or maybe a number of meridian channels, depending on the pose that you're doing. It's stimulating those channels. So it's like it's stimulating the garden hose. And what it's basically doing is whatever kinks you might have in the hose, so whatever kind of imbalances you have in your body, the poses are going to help you unkink everything so that the blood and the energy and oxygen and all of those beautiful things can flow freely through the hose, like water is meant to flow through a hose, right? So if you think of that analogy, now I want you to think of like where the end of the hose is, okay? So at some point, the hose enters into a specific organ in your body. okay? And I want you to think of the organ like it's got a container, okay? And so just like you fill water with a container, what's happening when you're doing a yin pose is you're starting to stimulate that garden hose that runs along through a specific area of the body. And at some point it goes into an organ. So let's just use the liver as an example, okay? So there's a meridian channel that starts on the feet. It actually starts on the top of the feet. And that meridian channel runs through the inside of the legs, up in through the torso. And at some point, like it goes into the liver itself. Now it extends up higher and into the face, but let's just pause for a moment to go, okay, well, it goes up into the liver. So what happens then? What actually happens to the liver? Well, this is the super cool part of yin and why I practice yin this way and why I was drawn to yin this way and why I teach yin this way. Like this is how I embody the practice, is about the emotional well-being and the organ health. So the nurturing of the emotional body and the organ health. And so each organ has a label to it. The label is an emotion. So with the liver, it has the emotion of anger with sub emotions of like frustration, irritation, rage, resentment. Okay. And if you go to some of my other podcasts, you'll see like I've started to break down like each organ set and what its emotions are. So I'm kind of going through that. But there's also an episode, it's like episode 4, where I talk about like it as a whole, right? So how the emotions and the meridian channels affect the organs, right? And then ultimately your life. So if we go back to the liver, so if I'm holding a lot of anger in my body, if I'm really frustrated, if I'm really irritated, maybe I'm even a little bit like raging, then that the energy of that emotion is going up into your liver and it stays there. Okay. It's like you've just put like a piece of clothing into the suitcase. The suitcase is the organ, right? But you left it there. You never took it out. So then it happens again. There's something else that either triggers you or something else happens in your life. And all of a sudden it's like, boom, right? Like you're frustrated again, or you're angry again, or you're irritated. And it's like you just put another piece of clothing into the suitcase. Well, the more you keep doing that without emptying out the suitcase at some point, it's going to overflow. It's going to be stuffed. And then there's not going to be any more room for anything else. And so what happens is eventually the body goes, oh, like this is just too much. I can't handle it, right? And the body implodes. So emotions are meant to move through us. They're not good. They're not bad. They're just indicators of where we are. And I talk a lot about that in many of my episodes. And it's always something I want to bring back into each episode because it's really important. And for a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily land right away, this whole concept, right? Like for some of you, especially if this is the first episode of mine that you're listening to, you might be going, whoa, like this is different, right? I thought I was coming to Yin Yoga to get stretched, to get flexible, to get bent, so to speak, right? But it's so much more than that. It's the nurturing of the emotions that you have in your body that you have not processed and released yet. And so what yin does is as that meridian channel is being stimulated and the energy is moving through the channel, right, into that area of the body, into that organ, it's flushing things out. So this is often where sometimes people will have an emotional response in a yin pose, and then they don't really understand why, especially if the context hasn't been provided for them. Then they're like, why am I crying this all the time? Or why am I so angry? Like I've had students like years ago when I was teaching in studios, I would literally have students throw blocks at me. Like not they weren't angry at me, but they were releasing, right? And I knew it. Like I was never insulted or irritated. In fact, after class, most of them would always come up to me and say, I'm so sorry, I actually threw that block towards you, but it wasn't actually you. And I'm like, oh, I know it wasn't me. Like, and I actually took it as a compliment because it meant that that person had something in their body that they were holding on to and they finally let go, right? And the emotion came up to the surface and it came out, right? And if you think of the word emotion, if you break down that word, emotion means movement, right? And that's what is supposed to happen. So in these yin poses, you're mellowing out for like 2, 3, 5 minutes, right? In a pose. And your mind begins to think, begins to wander. You start to, have thoughts. Sometimes it's thoughts about like, oh, shoot, I got to put that thing on the grocery list, or, like this, I got to get done today or whatever like that. But sometimes the really deep introspective thoughts will come in. Like, oh, why am I so angry all the time? Or why am I so fearful all the time? Or why do I worry all the time? Or why am I sad all the time? Or why am I grieving all the time? Like, why can't I let this go, right? Like sometimes these deeper level conversations happen when we're in the pose. And so when it does, this is an opportunity. This is like an invitation from your soul, from your body to go, okay, let's finally deal with this and let's let it come out and let's let it go, right? And it's such a gift when this happens. But you got to be in the pose first. You got to get things going. You got to get the juices flowing, right? And this is why I say the power of a single pose is so important. Because for some people, it may only take a single pose to release something really heavy that they've been holding on to for maybe even years, maybe even decades, maybe even a lifetime, right? Like it could be something that has been held since childhood, like a trauma that happened, right? And so what a gift that is to let that go. But there's got to be an awareness first. And this is why I say it's so important to be propped up in these poses, even if you are really flexible. Because if you're coming to the mat for the purpose of just the stretch, that's one thing. Then you know what? Maybe you won't need the poses or the props. Maybe you won't use them. But if you are coming to the mat because you want to be awakened to the emotions that maybe you're holding inside your body that you want to let go of. Maybe there's some distress. Maybe there's even maybe some physical imbalance or misalignment in your body. Maybe there's even illness, right? That you want to clear because your body can't heal itself. And I truly believe that. Like I'm a living testament to that, right? Go back to the first and the second episode in my podcast where I literally dive out my whole healing story, right? Yeah, the thumbs up. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, I don't know why this does this, but whatever, it's all good. And if you're just listening on Spotify, oh well, just laugh. So anyways, the invitation is always there. It's always there because your body is always communicating with you all the time. And when you're really propped up, you can kind of put aside a little bit the stretch, right? Because I'll tell you that your mind can only focus on really one thing at one time. And if the stretch is so intense, that's all your mind is going to gravitate to is, oh my God, like my inner thighs like are killing me right now, right? But when you're propped, you can let that piece go. And as you let that piece go, what happens is your mind is open to something else. Maybe it'll be open to a conversation where you'll wonder, what causes me to be so whatever, angry, fearful, worried, stressed, anxious, whatever it is. And so I've had so many profound moments in a single pose. And I'll tell you, for me, my favorite pose is butterfly, reclined butterfly, actually. So lying on your back, you would bring the soles of your feet together, let your knees open up wide to the edges of your mat and slide those blocks or cushions or blankets, whatever you got underneath you. It doesn't have to be the fancy props, just be like a couple of blankets, right? Or even some pillows. And I will just lay there and I'll start to focus on my breath. Because the moment I start to focus on the long held deep breaths, then right there, my mind is starting to get a little calmer, my body a little stiller, my nervous system is starting to pick up that energy of like, okay, we're chilling out here, we can settle, we're safe. And as soon as the body and the mind and the nervous system realize that they're safe, then you can start to let the subconscious mind's thoughts come up. And for me, I mean, I've said many times, Yin Yoga has literally saved my life. It saved me during, the time when I was married to an abusive alcoholic. Like Yin was my salvation. I would go into, the room and I would lock the door and I would get on my mat and I would do Yin and I would just breathe deeply and hold the poses and just tell myself everything is going to work out. Everything is going to be okay. I'm safe. Even when I didn't necessarily feel that way physically, I would tell myself that I could be. And then, times when I was just so depleted mentally and emotionally from trying to hold myself up, I would get into a Yin pose and it was usually butterfly. And sometimes I would stay there for like 10, 15 minutes, very propped up, obviously, but I would be there and I would hold the pose and I would breathe and I would allow my mind to expand. And when the thoughts came up, rather than judging them, I would get curious, be like, And sometimes I would even ask the questions of like, is this really true? Like, do I really believe what I'm thinking right now? And again, it was another opening, another moment of awareness of going, well, maybe I can choose to think something different. Maybe I don't have to think this way. And then that led another conversation that would come, well, if I'm not going to think that way, how do I want to think? And you see, there was like this compound ripple effect happening, where eventually, in some cases, not always, but in some cases, by the time I got out of the pose, I felt like I was a completely different person. Like I had shed another layer of myself that just wasn't serving me anymore. Ditching limiting beliefs. Like I have a whole course on that, on ditching limiting beliefs. That's what it's called. And it's all about using the practice of Yin as a way to release the deeply held thoughts in the subconscious mind that are preventing us from moving forward in our life in the way that we want to. It's really powerful. If you can wrap your head around the idea that this practice really can be more than just a physical stretch, it can be a way for you to embody massive transformation in your life and in your organ health. Because every single pose that you're in at some point affects some organ. And by affecting an organ, you're bringing balance. Like this is what this practice does. It's a holistic practice. It's very similar to acupuncture and acupressure, okay? It's a little more subtle because it's not quite as deep layered, right? Like you're stimulating the layers of connective tissue in the body. So it is a little bit more subtle, right? As opposed to like having a needle punctured into an acupressure point along the meridian channel, right? Or an applied pressure through, like if you're doing acupressure, right, on a point by, pressing and holding it in, right? So yin is a little more subtle, but it's still under the same concept and principle, that what you're doing is you're bringing balance back into an area of the body or an organ into the body. And this is, for me, has been a massive catalyst for my own organ health healing. Like, I have a uterine fibroid that was originally 12 centimeters that has now 6 centimeters, and I'm continuing to shrink it all the time. And I originally started with Chinese medicine, but then at one point that was just not accessible for me. So I had to find another route. And so I started to use the tools I already had, which were acupressure, because I know how to do it, and Yin Yoga and reflexology, right? And even using meditation and breath work. These were all practices that helped me recalibrate my mindset around this diagnosis, right? I also had like 5 liver cysts that have, 3 of them have already dissolved and the other 2 are shrinking. And, the lining of my gallbladder was enlarged. And so that's starting to shrink back to normal. See, and every single day I'm using these practices in some way, whether it's breath work with meditation, whether it's just mindfulness, thought patterns, whether it's getting into yin poses, right? Whether it's like doing some reflexology on myself or some acupressure on myself. But every single day, I am telling myself a different story that's helping me to heal my organs, but also emotional distress, because it's all connected, right? Like, your emotional body affects your organ health. And your organ health affects your life. Like, that cliche statement they say where if you don't have your health, you have nothing. It's so true. You could have all the money in the world, but if you don't have the health to enjoy it, you don't have anything. And that, that definitely applies to your organs. If your organs are not functioning optimally and there's disease, there is a compound effect on how you're living your life. And if you're in continuous emotional unconsciousness, where you're not acknowledging the emotions that you have and dealing with them, then you're basically suppressing them, and they get suppressed in your body. So you compound the emotional distress, eventually creates the physical manifestations in the body if we're not paying attention. This is why the power of the pause in a single yin pose can be your tool. And this is a practice that is accessible for so many people. I will tell you, as a yin yoga teacher who has been teaching for almost 25 years now, there is not a single pose that I cannot find some modification or variation for you, regardless of your health. There isn't. It might look completely different than what everybody else is doing, but I don't care. It's not about what it looks like. It's about how does it feel? It's about how is it impacting your emotional well-being and your organ health, and eventually the quality of your life. That's all I care about. Whether 50 people in the room are in wide-legged dragonfly and you have to be on your back with your legs on the wall and open, I don't care. It's still the same thing. Still has the same effect. And that's all I care about. And I'll tell you, probably almost every single class that I teach on my platform, I will usually at some point say, it doesn't matter what you look like in the pose. It's about how you feel. And what are you experiencing in the pose? Because we could have 200 people all in the same pose. And for one thing, no one will look the same. And secondly, not everybody will feel the exact same way. Just because we might be stimulating the kidney meridian channel where we hold fear, people will be responding differently to that, to the sensations and to the thoughts. No two people are alike. But the practice has the same benefit for every body and for everyone, regardless. I've had people do yin sitting in a chair because they couldn't sit on the floor or they couldn't lie down in a way that they could be propped. Like, I've seen it all. In almost 25 years, I've seen it all. Nothing has been able to prevent me from offering some suggestion to somebody. A huge part of my reflexology practice is working with cancer patients. A lot of my cancer patients have physical limitations because of the type of cancer that they have and how it's affected their body. And so when I teach them, like, the practice looks completely different. And that's okay. Because it's not about what it looks like. It's all about how it feels. And so if you're new to yin, and this has sparked like some deep introspective contemplation for you of like, wow, like, I can really get more out of this practice than just a physical stretch, then come and hang with me on my platform. Your first class is free. Your first month is $9.99. I have 2 different memberships, and I've got courses, I've got masterclass series, I've got bundles. You can start really slow and work your way up. I have so many yin practices on my platform. I also have wellness practices. So I've got a lot of like reflexology and acupressure practices up there, breath work and meditation, right? There's even a little bit of like gentle yoga flow for those that, you know, like to move a little bit, although it's not my specialty. But I mean, I am a teacher, I am a yoga teacher, so I do have some of that up there. But really, I'm a yinster, I'm a yin yogi at heart, and it's my passion. And it truly is one of my biggest gifts that I can bring to people, is the ability to help them create the awareness of their emotions and how it's impacting their organ health and how it is rippling into their life. And I teach this because this is what I've experienced. This is what I've been embodying in my own life. And I've been using this practice along with the other practices of breath work and meditation and reflexology and acupressure as my tools to heal and to continually heal and to evolve and to grow and to create my best life, because that's what I'm here for, is to live an incredible life where I'm making a massive impact in this world, teaching yin yoga and doing reflexology treatments. Like, it really is like that simple for me of what my desire and my passion is. So anyways, I will link all the information in the show notes below. So I hope this episode in some way has given you something to contemplate about. If something really huge came up for you, or even just a tiny little like aha moment, I would love to hear from you. Post a show note comment, a review, share this with anybody that you feel might benefit from this. It would actually mean the world to me. The more people practicing yin in this world, the more beautiful this world will be and can be. So thank you so much for pressing play today. And I will see you next Thursday for another episode of the Yinning at Life podcast.